Wagwan. Good morning, good night, welcome back. And if you're listening for the first time, I'm your host Melanie Byfield, welcoming you to a new season of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. The general election is over. The JLP, led by the Honourable Brogad, Dr. Andrew Holness, has retained the job of running the country. And there will be new MPs sat in Parliament when the new session begins. Of the 63 seats, 35 seats went to the JLP and 28 to the PNP, giving the JLP a 7-seat majority. That previous number was the JLP 49 to the PNP's 14. At the time of recording this podcast, though, that number is, the count isn't final. And there's also the possibility of legal challenges, so we'll see how that ends up. So with the voter turnout falling below 50%, Dr. Basil Wilson at John Jay College submitted an article to the Gleaner on how to boost voter turnout. He's making a suggestion at, for example, staggering the voting days. He says that in the same way that a special day is set aside for security personnel and election workers to vote, consideration should be given to other Jamaicans to vote on different days. He's making a suggestion, for example, where the elderly and disabled are concerned, and maybe they could vote on a particular day, and that other voters could vote maybe over 2 days, preferably on a weekend, Saturday and Sunday. He said, listen, everybody votes on the same day, and the process is slow, and some people, left, and them no one wait, so got a line long, right? And he also suggested that there could be early voting because it would ease congestion at polling stations. There are advantages, he goes on to say, of weekend voting. It wouldn't conflict with work for most people, and Jamaica could even make Election Day a public holiday. That, I'm going to interject and say, brings up that whole fixed elections argument, right? Because I was listening to a report that said that university students were they couldn't travel back to their respective parish to vote, Karen Brook, and they couldn't make it back to vote. And even students and the diaspora who were abroad, if you have a fixed election date, it gives people time to plan, right? So Mr. Wilson goes on to say that Jamaica should adopt, could even adopt automatic voter registration to increase the pool of voters, and I'm in total agreement with that. He was saying, when someone gets or renews a driver's license or does business at the tax office, you could get automatically renewed then, right? Automatically registered to vote at that time. And he was saying this way, voter registration could be ongoing and the number of voters could get boosted, and it would be easier for people to be registered to vote. I agree. You feed 2 birds with 1 corn, right? He was also pointing out that low voter turnout is no good for democracy, and he said Jamaica shouldn't be having turnouts below 50%. So the Electoral Office of Jamaica actually reported the voter turnout to be 39.5%. That's an increase of 1.6% from 2020, but still significantly below the historic 86.91% turnout. That was in 1980, and that was the highest on record in Jamaica. Actually, in the Caribbean, only Dominica and Haiti have lower voter turnouts than Jamaica. Every other country is over 50%. I'm going to talk a little bit about an article by Ralston Nemhard. He wrote an article in The Observer talking about how voting is a personal decision. He goes on to talk about how your decision to vote can be influenced by a number of factors. There's loyalty to a particular party. In Jamaica's tribal political culture, the main political parties can always depend on their die-hard supporters. And then he also talks about, those who decide to withdraw from the political process, namely the undecideds, right? But he goes on to say that this is not necessarily a true description of who they are. They've made a decision not to participate, and for many, this position has been that way for years. That group, they're not beholden to any political party, and it doesn't mean they won't come out and vote occasionally, but by and large, they've become disaffected with how the politics is conducted. Some hold the strong position that given our broken Westminster system of governance, any vote for either party is a wasted vote, and they'd rather stay home than dotty up them finger with ink. Then he goes on to say there are those who stay home simply because they've come to the conclusion that they don't see how their lives can be bettered if they do go out and vote. They're not necessarily apathetic or uninterested, but they're in revolt against a system that they believe hasn't delivered anything for them. Then there are those who, he says in his estimation, are a few in number, but they refuse to vote because of their belief that serious and radical constitutional changes to how Jamaica is governed ought to become a reality. He goes on to say that to vote in any election is to support the continuance of a system that hasn't served the country well and is in urgent need of revamping. They will not indulge the hypocrisy of voting in a system with which they have an intellectual disagreement. Withholding their vote is not just a sign of protest, but a demonstration of a philosophical position to which they are deeply committed. He says, I find sympathy with this group with a caveat. While I detest the present system, I take the practical approach that the mechanism of government, though not the best, is what we have. Not voting in an election will only allow oneself to be governed by the choice of a few. He says, I'm conscious that presently the mechanism of government calls for 63 parliamentarians to be elected to Parliament, with senators to be appointed later and a prime minister installed. None of this will change anytime soon. While we must agitate vigorously for constitutional change, the business of the government has to go on. I therefore take what I believe to be the pragmatic course of assessing the history of the performance of each tribe while in office. As elections draw near, I'm paying keen attention to their policy pronouncements and their posturing on the political stage to determine which side is best able to lead the country at this time. So what are some of the issues facing the country that has now been entrusted to the Holness administration? Ralston Hyman submitted an article to the Gleaner last month, and he was talking about things like the high cost of energy, the economy, what they're going to do to increase productivity, the massive trade deficit. Jamaica continues to import 4 times the amount that is exported. Those are just a few of the serious issues in play, so why not vote? Let's remind ourselves, that article we just mentioned with the broken Westminster system of governance and the need for radical constitutional change to how Jamaica's governed, that literally cannot happen if you don't vote. Constitutional reform is being proposed, whatever form that bill ends up taking, can't proceed without the vote of the Jamaican electorate. there has to be a referendum to remove the monarchy, and the system of governments needs the participation of the Jamaican electorate in order to change. So yeah, we have new faces in Parliament, right? Who's going to be your MP for the next 5 years? I actually heard Nikisha Burchell, the new MP for St James Southern, saying that her constituents are already asking her when and where the first town hall meeting's going to be. Do you know the plans that are being made for your constituency? How do you know how the constituency development funds are going to be spent in your constituency? Yeah, good questions to ask. So, I'm going to share a little bit about a new MP with you. We're going to talk about these new MPs, going forward, share a little bit about them. And we're going to start with Isaac Buchanan. He's the new MP for Portland Eastern, and he defeated the incumbent Anne-Marie Vaz. He gave an interview to the Gleaner, and I'm going to just share a little bit about that interview with you. And it was basically how he plotted the road to victory. He said, I walked through every division. I went from house to house. I was in the market. I was at the 9 nights. I was at the funerals. I was at the graduations. I was in the spaces, at the beach, everywhere. In Moortown, in the Valley, Manchineal, Hector's River, Fairy Hill, Prospect, Port Antonio, you name it. Snow Hill, Norwich. The point I'm making, I met the people. I did the canvas myself. He goes on to say, you have to listen to the people. You have to have humility and understand your role. And that's certainly what I did. And my pitch to them is for their children. I want their children to become the best versions of themselves. The article says that he lives in the constituency, living and sharing the experiences gave him local identity. So he, like other constituents, wants water in his pipes. He was saying, I live down there. The first thing I want is water in my pipe. The bucket life is no more. We're ending the days where you have to buy water from the MP. That's no more. I'm there now. I'm living everything that they're living, but the people know what they want. He goes on to say that he's a servant of the people as a lawyer and now as an elected representative. A growing exclusion from activities of economic empowerment, the denial of beach access and land grabbing by the wealthy in Portland are among key issues of concerns raised by the electors. So why Portland? The only thing, he says, I know for sure was wherever I was going to go, the Maroons would have to be there, and that's serendipity for me, or that's how God aligns the stars. Moortown is where Nanny came from, and I said that's where I'm going, and the rest is history. Now what about the future? Reforming the Constitution is about more than separation from the monarchy. There's a fight brewing, but it's not against Jamaica becoming a republic. It's a fight to put Jamaica's journey to becoming a republic on a different road. So where are we with this constitutional reform? There was a bill tabled in Parliament in December 2024. The Joint Select Committee meetings took place without the opposition and were concluded. There's a report that is waiting to be released. Some of the issues that are, active, retention of the parliamentary system, lack of public participation and education, the method of appointing a non-executive president, no impeachment provision, no recall provision, and leaving the Privy Council, although now the Prime Minister recently said that he wants a local apex court. Advocates Network and many others are stating that the systems of governance is broken. they put forward some data. Since independence, Jamaica's parliamentary system has centralised power and eroded trust. Citizens are disillusioned by corruption, neglect and lack of accountability, and polls confirm an overwhelming support for systemic reform. 79% want to directly elect a head of state. 70% want the appointment of a head of state to be made by the Prime Minister in consultation with the people. 92% want impeachment laws for corrupt politicians. 89% call for recall powers for underperforming MPs. 78% want term limits for prime ministers, and 76% want term limits for councillors and MPs. And 81% want fixed election dates. In addition, changes to increase accountability, support good governance and improve standards of living are also part of what is being advocated to reform the system of governance, right, including greater parliamentary oversight and citizens' rights to petition, transparent, accountable governance, an independent judiciary rooted in Jamaican Caribbean values, and empowering local government with resources and decision-making authority. That's an argument I've been hearing about much more, actually. So we're going to see what happens with constitutional reform once the new session of Parliament begins. I'm going to leave you with a quote from the earlier article that we were reading about by Ralston Nemhard. He says, "I want to have a stake in the game, to be a strong participant in the process, to have a seat at the table rather than being part of the menu. If I do not vote, I will be governed by the choices of those who do. In the end, my vote might not change anything in my favour, but I'm not going down without a fight." Remember, if you're not registered to vote, September 30, 2025 is the deadline to register for the November 30, 2025 voters list. March 31, 26 is the deadline to vote for the May 31, 26 voters list. There's going to be plenty more opportunities to cast your vote as a citizen and registered voter of Jamaica, so, don't let that stop you. Please register to vote. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you want to reason about anything or you can't find any of the material I was talking about, you can email me on atasteofja@outlook.com. Until the next time, thank you for supporting this podcast. Please subscribe, like, follow, and share it with family and friends. And again, I thank you for taking the time to listen. One love. Yes, the word is love.